Hello, fellow humans of Earth. Welcome to a little bit of an interesting discussion. This shouldn't take long. In fact, this is likely my shortest thing to date. And that's because I'm talking about something in my Alan Wake 2 final draft playthrough that I'd call it a theory, but really it's all but confirmed. The game never says it outright, but the evidence is just so glaring that the second you start to look at it, it just falls in place. I don't know. I don't know why I'm beating around the bush here. You saw the title and the thumbnail. You already know what you're looking at. You clicked the video. The theory is that Warlin Door / Martin Hatch is Saga Anderson's long-lost father. I'd heard of this theory before, but until the last stretch of my second playthrough, I didn't really believe it personally. But I do now. The evidence really couldn't be clearer, and that's what I'm here to show you. Starting with... I don't know if this event actually has a name, but I'm just calling it the Convergence for shorthand's sake. This event is what happened to Martin Hatch within a cave where an AWE occurred, distorting the Chronon field and ripping Martin Hatch across realities. Initially, this caused him to experience every version of himself in every reality at the same time. But eventually, he gained a new clarity, which basically took every single Martin Hatch, better known in some realities as Warlin Door, and turned them into one singular being, a shifter, erasing all the other versions from the past and present of their respective realities. It said at one point that there was no record of him ever having existed, even though some people remembered him. But that's why I call it the Convergence. All of the variants of this one man converged into a singular, one and only Warlin Door, who is a shifter, meaning he can move across realities and dimensions as he pleases. Now, I will say, the timeline feels a little bit weird, which I guess isn't too surprising when we're dealing with time travel, but it's unconfirmed when this event within the cave happened, and it's also not clear whether it happened at the same time in all realities. But luckily for us, there's only one reality which really concerns us here. The one with... Thor and Odin Anderson, or the old gods of Asgard, drank moonshine made of paranatural water that gave them psychic superpowers. Now, something that we learn from this is that some paranatural abilities in this universe, regardless of how they came to be, can actually be passed down through genetics. Thor's daughter, Freya Anderson, had these powers but decided to try and keep them hidden and to ignore them out of fear for the safety of both herself and for those around her. Now, we don't really know a lot about Freya Anderson, but we do know that she left Watery and moved across the country soon after the birth of her daughter. She hated her loose cannon of a father, and her husband was gone. We'll get to that in a second. By the time Alan Wake 2 rolls around, Saga has basically only ever heard of her late mother family-wise, and knows nothing of the other Andersons or of her father. We learn of the Andersons in that story, but what about the other one? What about... The enigmatic father has most of the information about him given to us by Thor, which, by the way, I'm going to go ahead and tack this down as a minor piece of evidence. People tend to say the word door when talking about Warlin, even when they aren't mentioning his name, and that does happen in some of these conversations. But that aside, according to Thor, Saga's father was a complicated and strange man who had a tendency of getting into trouble, and you know that means something coming from a paranatural rock star. It's said that he was always taking too many steps ahead and that one day he was just gone. Far before Saga ever remembered. Incredibly far before, seemingly, judging by the photo in the nursing home with all the Andersons, including a practically newborn Saga, and notably, no father. Sneaking in another very minor piece of evidence. We see in this photo that Freya was white, meaning that Saga's biracial genetics came from her parents, not her grandparents. And just for the sake of the timeline here, Saga was born in 1988, being 35 years old at the time of Alan Wake 2. So, we have gathered that Saga's father was a troublesomely strange, scheming, and enigmatic man of color who mysteriously disappeared shortly after her birth in 1988. And that's most of what we get out of Thor, so let's hop down to the Dark Place and have a chat with... Tim Breaker has been trapped in the Dark Place since the beginning of the game when he tried to give Saga a manuscript page. We'll come back to that later, when he disappears behind a flash of Door's face. Now, Tim actually has minor glimpses of the alternate lives he lived as both Jack Joyce and as Sean Ashmore, along with some stragglers like Branch. We learn in Night Springs episode 3 that Warlin Door, the Master of Many Worlds, has been shifting through realities and killing different variants of Tim Breaker, so being connected to those variants somewhat, Tim has seen Door's face a lot, and senses him as being dangerous. Before even entering the Dark Place, Tim researched Door and found some strange evidence. There has never been any report of a Warlin Door ever existing anywhere, not to mention the Bright Falls area. That is, outside of a recognition of his face by a few eyewitness reports of him mysteriously disappearing in a bolt of lightning in 1988. I mean, come on, man, it's just there. And if you still aren't convinced, because, two somewhat similar people going missing in a similar place in the same year, that's not entirely impossible. Well, why don't you ask? Warlin Door has some stuff to say, both to Alan and his time in the talk show, and to Saga herself towards the end of the game. When it comes to Alan, Warlin is a bit of a weird enigma in terms of Dark Place encounters. Not only is he a new face, but he also seems to be directly helping Alan, and doing it in a way beyond just handing him a gun or having a quick brainstorm session. Not only is his studio where Aughty leads Alan to get the angel lamp, but Door literally gives Alan hints on how to manipulate the Dark Place to his advantage, multiple times, as if he's been doing it for years. He constantly pulls Alan back to help him and have conversations, playing it as a show to appease the artistic nature of the dimension. In the final conversation between the two, Warlin drops the facade and reveals that he wasn't really doing this for Alan, but for someone who was very important to him that Alan dragged into this. And when does that conversation happen? Oh, yeah, only the exact next cutscene after Alan edits Return to put Saga Anderson into the story. Like, seriously, he edits Saga in, the chapter ends, next chapter starts, and the conversation happens. But with Door being both a shifter and a master planner, he probably saw this coming from a million miles away. So, at this point, it's pretty obvious that Saga is that important person that Door was talking about. But what does he have to do with her? Later in the end of the game, Saga enters the deep end of the Dark Place, the version of New York that Alan was trapped in for years. Here, she finally meets back up with Tim Breaker after all this time, who finally gets to give her. The manuscript page that Tim tried to give Saga all that time ago is a one-of-a-kind. Not about Alan, Scratch, or Saga, but about Door, a man Saga has never heard of. This exact page was kept from her up until this exact moment, and that seems to be intentional, since this moment was when she needed it most. It described Door shifting through areas of the Dark Place with specific methods, going from exactly where Saga was, to exactly where she needed to be. For Wake, changing between those two realities took entire missions worth of effort, but Warlin was telling Saga how to do it so simply as walking through a door. Saga gets a little confused by this and decides to use her psychic powers to analyze Warlin, giving us the single biggest piece of evidence in this whole puzzle. A piece of evidence so damning, I'm not even gonna explain it, I'm just gonna show it to you.
The Dark Place has many faces and many names. It is a mirror, reflecting all possible realities. The family of Doors have the power to shift between these realities, here and elsewhere.
If I can find a way to navigate through this nightmare.
Family of
Maybe
Doors.
I can find a way to get back home.
Wait! Which he's telling her to do. Warlin describes the power which, just like that of the Andersons, can be genetically passed down through the family of Doors. A power which in this exact current moment, Door is telling Saga to use. So that's the idea. Warlin Door got Freya Anderson pregnant shortly after the initial event within the cave, and only after Saga Anderson's birth in 1988 did all doors converge into one, suddenly disappearing in a bolt of lightning. Most people forgot about Door's existence, except for the Andersons, who, of course, are immune to memory alterations. Door recognized the danger of his existence as a shifter, but still loved his daughter. When he learned that Alan Wake would one day pull her into the Dark Place, he moved there himself. He caused the creation of a manuscript page that would teach Saga to use her second set of genetic superpowers, and stole away the man he's best at controlling, Tim Breaker, to get it to her at the perfect time. All the while, he's assuring that everything goes to plan with Alan getting his daughter out of the Dark Place, and saving his granddaughter in the process. Remember when I said this might as well not be a theory? You agree with me yet? In my eyes, this is practically confirmed, and it's basically undeniable. And you know what? I have never been so excited about Saga. Her and Door both. Saga, for one, may end up becoming the single most powerful person in the Remedyverse, because she's half Psychic Anderson and half reality-shifting Door. Door will almost certainly become the main villain later down the line, considering his contention with both Alan Wake and Tim Breaker, and his conversations with the Hiss-possessed Dylan Faden. I think it sounds awesome. Count me in. So, yeah. Warlin Door is Saga Anderson's dad. I do not have a doubt in my mind. Let me know your thoughts if you have any. I'd love to hear them. But, in that case, it was nice talking to you. And I will see you later.